I was recently in a play about the Irish Easter Rebellion of 1916. The Irish had been oppressed by the British Empire for about 700 years leading to this rebellion. The play was with the theater company called the Crowded Kitchen Players, and it was directed and adapted by Ara Barleeb. And in the play, I got to play this great Irish revolutionary whose name was James Connolly. I had knew from nothing about Irish history, and I had never heard of James Connolly. But in order to play the role, I read a lot of books about Irish history, and I read 2 books written by James Connolly himself. And then I realized that on one of my favorite leftist websites called the Greenville Post, on the front page of the website at the bottom, there is a picture of James Connolly that has been there for years, and I never noticed it until I was in this show. And the quote that goes along with the picture is, "In capitalist societies, governments are merely committees of the rich to manage the affairs of the capitalist class." James Connolly was a Marxist, in pretty much very similar vein to some of the great Marxist revolutionaries. Several of them were his contemporaries: Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, Leon Trotsky, Mao Zedong, and then the next generation of revolutionaries, Fidel Castro and Che Guevara. Che Guevara was actually 1/4 Irish. He was raised in Argentina, but his Irish grandmother would tell him endless stories about James Connolly and many of the other great Irish revolutionaries, and he fell in love with these revolutionaries. And after Fidel Castro and Che successfully pulled off the Cuban Revolution, Che was traveling back from Moscow to Havana. And he stopped off in Dublin, where he was considered a hero. He went into a bar and became friendly with the bartender, who was an artist. And it is that Irish artist who painted the famous picture, the iconic picture of Che Guevara that is on so many t-shirts. The big difference between James Connolly and these other Marxist revolutionaries was that they won their revolutions. Then they had to defend their revolutions against the entire world that was trying to crush them. They, of course, had to use violence sometimes to defend their revolutions. And because of that, they have ever been completely demonized by Western propaganda. James Connolly lost his Easter Rebellion and was immediately executed. So to this day, he is still very much revered, at least in Ireland. In Dublin, there is a statue of James Connolly, and the inscription on the statue is, "The cause of Labour is the cause of Ireland, and the cause of Ireland is the cause of Labour." 7 men led the Irish Easter Rebellion of 1916, including Connolly, and the other 6 men were all middle-class Irish Catholics, highly educated, scholars, teachers, poets. And these middle-class men had no military training at all. So James Connolly, who had military training because he had been in the British Army out of desperation, became the military leader of the Irish Easter Rebellion. Connolly was also completely different than these other 6 leaders. They were middle class. Connolly was raised in a slum. He had a 3rd grade education. He pulled himself up by his bootstraps. He self-educated. He became a Marxist scholar. He became a great union organizer and an author and a journalist. He wrote many, many articles. Connolly never really trusted the other middle-class leaders. He always felt that if he looked at Irish history, that middle-class leaders had often sold out the Irish working class to get a better deal for themselves from the British. Now, of course, he believed these 6 other leaders were strong Irish nationalists. They wanted to free Ireland from the British Empire. They wanted to save Irish culture, save the Irish language Gaelic. But another reason why he distrusted them is that he felt that middle-class capitalists, even though they were Irish, if they took over the country, they would exploit the poor workers and farmers of Ireland just as much as the English capitalists. And as much as 95% of the people of Ireland were exploited workers and poor farmers. James Connolly also had lived for a number of years in the United States, where he participated with the socialists here in the United States. He was a member of the International Workers of the World, the Wobblies, and this was a time when the socialists had a very powerful force in America, the early part of the 1900s, until they were completely crushed by the ruling class. Connolly then returned to Ireland from America just in time to help lead the Irish Easter Rebellion of 1916, in which he was executed and lost his life. Today, I'm going to bring James Connolly to life for you. And in addition, many of the great Irish revolutionaries down through the ages, particularly Pádraig Pearse, who was the main leader of the Irish Easter Rebellion. But before I do that, I'm going to have to give you a very quick synopsis of Irish history for the 1,000 years leading up to the Irish Rebellion of 1916. But this is the end of part one. Part two will continue with that history.